the U.S. Senate's debating President Trump's huge tax and spending bill, with the Democrats seeking to delay any final vote. The final legislation aims to extend tax cuts for Mr. Trump's first term while boosting border security and cutting social welfare programs. Democrats are opposed to it, and some Republicans are also concerned it would end health care coverage for many poor Americans and adds more than $3 trillion to the already vast national debt over the decade. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the Republican strategist and chair of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. How nice to see you again, Greg. So lots of hours of debate. I mean, it took 16 hours to read that bill in full, all 940 pages of it. Yeah. What are the more controversial elements of this so-called big, beautiful bill? Because I'm wondering why it's faced such a bumpy ride so far, even though Republicans control both houses.
Yeah, Charles, it's a great question. And I think a lot of it's because you're going to have natural pushback from both the right and the left. That's the legislative process, and that's probably a healthy part of democracy. But you do have those senators, for example, like Rand Paul on the right, who's very much the libertarian, that his view is there aren't enough spending reductions in the bill. And he's very much opposed to further borrowing and further deficit increases. And then you have the more moderate Republicans like Tom Tillis in North Carolina, who's in a swing district. He's already announced only this weekend that he will not be running again. But there's Susan Collins in Maine. These are senators that are either in Democrat states or swing states that don't really have the luxury of massive spending cuts like many of the red state senators do. So this is just a natural push and pull in legislation. It's probably something that's necessary. It doesn't surprise me that it's taken quite a bit of time, and it also doesn't surprise me that there's disagreement. That's just part of the process.
Well, I mean, I know you're downplaying it a bit, but what makes this thing so sort of notable is that both Republicans and Democrats are criticizing it, especially the part of it that cuts Medicaid and the federal nutrition assistance program. And as you also mentioned, Greg, I mean, there is concern about how much this is going to add to the deficit or debt burden that the U.S. has, with some estimates putting it at an additional $3.3 trillion. I mean, that's a big worry, isn't it, for a lot of fiscally conservative Republicans who don't want to add to the national debt? I mean, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, no, that's sensible. And I think, Rick Scott from Florida and Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, they're fiscal hawks. I think many of us conservatives would agree with their concerns. But you also have to consider that no Democrat will vote for any spending cuts because they love transfer payments. They love redistribution. And that's a difficult argument to make on the right. So, but you do have some, disagreement. And again, I think that's healthy, but I do think there's some problems with the bill, but understanding that this is not the end of cost cutting or of spending reductions. They just need to get this bill through because it's a massive, if they didn't pass it, there would be a massive tax increase on Americans and on American people and businesses that would be very detrimental to the economy and detrimental to wage growth. So I think in this case, you're going to have those natural disagreements between, the moderate wing and the more conservative wing of the party. I think what's most important is that they get it done. The fears of the deficit, and I understand why they're concerned, because we have $36 trillion in debt and 11 trillion of that is from the last 4 years. But they're not factoring in the growth that's expected in the economy. So by reducing taxes, reducing regulations, you'll see a massive increase in GDP growth, but more importantly in wage growth, which ends up yielding more tax revenue. So that's not factored in. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, looks at these proposals in a very static way, where they don't consider that economic growth usually leads to tax receipts going up. So when President Trump pushed through this particular legislation in 2017, and these are the tax cuts we're just trying to extend. They're not new tax cuts, they're just extensions. That ended up yielding a 50% increase in tax revenues. So I think that, unfortunately, the CBO has to judge these things in a very static way. And it's misleading because they say, yes, there'll be this deficit increase when that's in reality, that's not the case.
Well, I understand there's also a particular concern, and again, you may have mentioned this earlier, particular concern in Congress among Republicans that with the midterm elections coming up next year, some Republicans could be vulnerable to a flip to the Democrats because of these cuts to social spending.
Absolutely, because there are Republican congressmen and congresswomen in so-called blue states, in Democrat-led states like California, Illinois, and New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and they're more vulnerable because a lot of their constituents are concerned that there's too much cutting to spending, and they're in sort of, as I said, swing districts, and they're more vulnerable. The other thing that is a big issue for those particular representatives is the so-called SALT, state and local tax offset, where the taxes that you pay at a state and a local level, like I pay in Illinois, are offset by your federal tax return. It's a little bit inside baseball, Charles. I don't want to bore you with the details, but there's a lot of pushback from those again, Republicans, but that are in blue states or in swing states. So yeah, this is just the legislative process. It doesn't surprise me, but you have to understand that these people want to be reelected, and so we all don't have the luxury of being legislators from solidly red states or solidly Republican states. You need those guys, those people from California. You need them from New York. You need them from Illinois. And that's why they can't go too far to the right on some of this legislation.
So given all that, I mean, was it rather politically risky for Donald Trump to put everything he wants in one bill?
Well, it is politically risky, but the president hasn't put everything he wants in the bill. He's actually been pretty moderate about the argument. He just wants something passed, because the critical part of this bill, without all the detail, is the extension of the 2017 tax cuts and some deregulation. Those tax cuts resulted in massive wage growth in 2019 and 2020. It was very productive for Americans and really important to extend those tax cuts. So the president's not worried too much about some of the legislation on the margins. What's most important to him is getting those tax cuts extended, and because they've been so good for Americans, they've been so good for the economy, and the president, understands that the lower 50% of Americans in terms of income are really the ones that got him elected, and he's got to look after them, not by transfer payments, not by taking from one group and giving to the other, but by reducing the tax burden on business, especially small business, and letting Americans make more money, which is really important to his economic policy. So, this is something that's really important for him to get the tax cuts extended. All of the other stuff, the Medicare cuts, the other reductions in spending, other tax cuts around the margins. That's all nice, but what's most important is extending the 2017 tax cuts, and the alternative would be devastating to the economy and to wage earners.
On that note, Greg, I want to thank you very much indeed. Greg Swenson is the
Charles.
Republican strategist, chair of Republicans Overseas UK. He was talking to me on the line from London.